Hi everyone, it's Ruth. Today we're going to be taking a look at relief printing. This is one of my favorite printing processes, so I'm super excited about sharing it with you all. Relief printing is all about carving into a surface. Typically, it's done on a piece of wood, like a wood block, or a piece of linoleum, which is my favorite. But you use special carving tools to kind of dig into that surface, leaving this indent that you can then ink up and print. What we're going to be doing today, though, is a little variation of that. We're going to be carving into styrofoam. It'll be a little easier on our wrists. So it'll be a little more enjoyable, I think. Let's take a look at a couple examples I have here. Now, these are just some prints that I kind of carved into styrofoam earlier. And you can see it's just a thin piece of styrofoam that I used, that I carved into, and I was able to ink that up and print it. One of the things that I want to kind of want us to keep in the back of our mind as we're doing this is whatever we carve into our plate, we're going to be printing a mirror image of that. So it's good to keep that in mind, especially if we're wanting to do some kind of lettering, right? So you can see here that it's just that mirror image of what I carved, right? But these are just a couple examples of how our prints might turn out. So I'm going to move this aside and let's talk supplies. So the first thing we need, as we do with every week, are illustrated instructions. We're going to be following along with these today. I'll be guiding us through that process, but our illustrated instructions are all laid out the same way. We have a list of supplies that we're going to be using at the top, and I'll go over that in just a moment. And then that process is laid out step by step. One of the things that I wanted to point out here is that printing process that we're doing is very similar to other processes that we're going to be doing. Inking the plate up to print it. It's that starting place that's different. So we're going to be using that styrofoam today to carve into, and then we're going to make our prints out of that. So go ahead, if you have those illustrated instructions, pull those out. We'll be following along with them. The next thing we need is going to be paper. So if you have your kit, you'll have a nice sketchbook here that has some smooth paper, some great paper to use. When it comes to paper for printing, typically the smoother the paper, the better. You're going to get a cleaner transfer of pigment. And so this sketchbook paper that we're using is nice and smooth, so it works very well, really well. You can use other paper like copy paper or construction paper, or you can use like found paper, like magazine pages or calendar pages, junk mail, things like that, wrapping paper, all sorts of options. But the thing to keep in mind is that any paper works well, just the smoother paper works better. So go ahead and pull out your paper. We'll have that prepped. The next thing we need, which is probably one of the more important pieces, is our brayer. This is one of the supplies that we use in basically every printing process that we're going to be going over. But again, it's just a regular brayer, rubber brayer, that has a smooth surface that we'll use to transfer our pigment from our paper or from our tray to our plate so we can print it. So go ahead and pull out that brayer. The next thing we need is going to be our pigment. Now we're going to be using acrylic paint today. And the truth is, like, really any kind of acrylic paint will work for this process. If you have the kit, you'll have 3 different colors, a red, yellow, and blue. And you can definitely mix these colors to make more variety of colors, but you can also bring in other acrylic paint as well. Typically you want some that's a little thicker. I'm using Apple Barrel today, which is kind of a thin, more runny paint, but it still works. Any acrylic paint will work for this. You're also welcome to use block printing ink, which we used a few weeks ago in our monotype printing. But we'll be using some acrylic paint. So go ahead and pull your paint out. And then the last thing we need out of our kit is going to be that piece of styrofoam. In your kit, you have a little tray that has a lip on it. We're going to be cutting that lip off because we want that smooth surface, right? You may notice on the back, you have the indent there. Know that that's okay if the indent is there. We're not going to carve into that surface. We want that flat surface for printing. And while we're talking about styrofoam, the truth is you can use any type of styrofoam. I have a pack of styrofoam plates that I bought quite a while ago that I've been very slowly going through. But just a regular styrofoam plate, you cut the lip off, you're using that smooth surface to print. So any piece of styrofoam plate or to-go box will work well for this. But go ahead and pull that styrofoam out. Now, there are a couple things that we need that are not in the kit. And one of them is going to be a pen or a dull pencil. We're going to be using this as our carving tool today. One of the things you can also use that I'll be using is the end of a paintbrush. In your kit, you received a paintbrush. And so we'll be doing, I'll be using the end of the paintbrush to do my carving. The next thing we need that is not in our kit is a workspace. I typically work off a piece of foil. It helps me keep everything contained. And it's always just a good idea to protect your space anyway. So you can use the foil like I'm using. You can use wax paper, newspaper, magazine pages, disposable tablecloth. Anything really is good for helping us contain our print today. We'll also need an extra piece of foil or paper plate that we can use to hold our pigment so we can get it on that brayer. So I'll be using a little tray of foil today. So that'll be where I keep my pigment. The last thing we need will be a pair of scissors. We don't need this for a huge part. We're just using this to cut off that lip of the styrofoam. So those are the supplies that we need today. Just as a reminder, it's better to be safe than sorry. So it's always good to wear clothes that you don't mind getting a little messy, or an apron like I wear. I know we're working with just acrylic paint today, and typically that's not a super messy supply, but like I said, it's better to be safe than sorry. So we're going to be using our acrylic paint today. Now go ahead, once you have all your supplies out, let's go ahead and cut that lip off of that styrofoam plate. So I have one here that I've already cut up, and it's a nice smooth piece. Like I said, on the back there's an indent, and know that that's okay. We're not going to be printing on that side. We want that smooth surface to print on today. So I'm going to move some things out of my way here. Let's get started. So if we look at our illustrated instructions, that very first step is using a pen or a dull pencil and carving into that styrofoam plate. We're going to carve our design in. So it's always good to know what you're going to do before you do it. So there's no way, once you carve into this surface, there's no way to uncarve it. So one of the things that I do that really helps me is I take a marker. I'm using a Sharpie today, but any marker will work. It has a wide surface, and so it'll be easy to kind of draw on without digging into that surface. Once you have your styrofoam cut out, it's time to draw in our design. So I'm going to be doing a flower today. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of draw. And again, it doesn't have to be a perfect design. I'm just kind of like drawing in kind of what I think I want to draw or print today. So I'm going to be doing a little flower. One of the things that I do want to mention while we're drawing our plate is we're going to be inking up that whole thing. So if you're not going to fill up that whole surface, you can see that I have some space at the top, and it's okay to leave that space there. But the thing to remember is that that will be a solid color. So if I'm using red today, I'll have a solid bit of red here. I'll be closer to the edges. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want, but I want something that's a little closer to my design. So I'm just going to take my scissors and trim just a little bit off. So I have a plate that's a little closer to my drawing. All right. So once we get our drawing on there, it's time to do the carving. Now, there are a couple tips when it comes to the carving styrofoam. Like I said, I'm going to be using the end of a paintbrush today because it's a nice rounded edge. but you can use a dull pencil or a pen. If you're using a pen, it's good to use it without that tip on there. We want to carve into the surface, dig into the surface, but we don't want to go all the way through. If we go all the way through, we have kind of a wonky plate and it's kind of hard to keep it together. It becomes more fragile. And so we just want to kind of dig into that surface. Take your time with it. It won't take too long to carve into it. But if you go faster, sometimes you get little bits of styrofoam that come up. And so that's not always, always good. So take your time with it. So I'm going to slowly kind of press into my styrofoam. And again, I'm just kind of going slowly around. I may not be following my drawing exactly, and that's okay. That drawing is kind of a guideline, giving me a starting place. And so I'm just kind of pressing into my plate. You'll be able to feel, as you're carving into it, you'll be able to feel those indents. And so it's good to kind of check every now and then just to make sure those indents are going deep enough. And so I'm just kind of taking my time, just pressing in. We're not carving anything out exactly. We're just kind of pressing that styrofoam down. And so I'm just kind of pressing into my plate. And I'm taking my time with it. Again, if we go faster, sometimes there's a chance of little bits of styrofoam coming up. And so it's good to just kind of take our time with it. And again, just not going too quickly, but making sure I feel those indents. And it's good to just take your time with it. And just kind of checking it as you're going through. So I've been doing lines on mine, kind of pulling that paintbrush, the end of the paintbrush through. You can see on my flower here, I've got some dots drawn in. So what I can do is just kind of press into that styrofoam. We can use other things to make those marks. It doesn't have to be that paintbrush edge. And you can definitely get more fine lines if you use a sharper point, but you just have to be careful that you don't dig in too deeply with that sharp point. And so now I'm just going to kind of work on my stem here. Create my flowers. I love using the styrofoam for this project because unlike other materials, this one you can wash in the sink and reuse. So you're making a plate that you can use over and over again. And again, like the plates that we've been using in this series have been different. We've used plexiglass, we've used cardboard, we're using styrofoam today. And another project will be using a jelly plate. So there are a variety of plates that we can use to create these prints. And I think that's what's wonderful about printmaking is there's so many ways to do it, right? So I'm just going to add a little detail to my leaves. You can see it's not a super detailed print that I have here. But before I do my inking, I'm just going to take my hand, my finger, and just kind of rub it across to make sure that everything has indents, right? I've talked before about how that first print we pull is kind of like that tester print. It's to kind of check the lines to make sure everything's deep enough. It's making sure we have enough pigment, things like that. And so we'll get a lot of information from that first print. But already when I took my finger to rub it across, I realized that this leaf here wasn't deep enough. So I'm just going to go back in with my paintbrush and just press it a little deeper, a little harder. All right. So now let's get ready for the printing part, the fun part. So I'm ready to ink my plate. What I'm going to go ahead and do is pull out a couple pieces of paper, right? And have that ready for me. So I'm ready to ink it up. We're using acrylic paint today, and so the good thing about acrylic paint is that it dries quickly. We don't have a lot of wait time, but the bad thing about acrylic paint is that it dries quickly. So we can't work at a really slow pace for this process. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and pull my pigment out. Now that I have my plate ready and I have my paper ready, I'm going to start with my pigment. And so we're just going to do kind of a large blueberry size shape. If we look at our illustrated instructions, just as I said earlier, we're going through that same printing process, right? We're starting with that little dollop of paint. We're going to take our brayer and roll it across because we want a nice thin layer of paint across that roller, right? And then once we get our brayer covered, we're going to roll it across our stamp that we just created, that plate that we just created, and we'll be able to print it on paper. Right. So after I've got my pieces ready, I've got my paint on my tray, I'm going to take my brayer and just kind of roll it across. You'll be able to tell if you need some more pigment on your plate or on your brayer because you do want a nice even coat. And sometimes that may be a little hard to get if you have really thin pigment. Like if you're using apple barrel, it's not a very thick pigment. So you may get a little streaking happen. But the thicker, the better when it comes to pigment to use for this. So I'm just going to cover my brayer. Now that my brayer is covered in that pigment, I'm going to do one smooth one smooth roll across my plate, right? I don't want to go over and over because there's a chance of leaving those streaks, which is not necessarily bad if that's what you're going for. But to get that nice smooth application of pigment, I'm going to do one straight roll, right? So I'm going to start at one end and just smoothly right across, right? So once I have it on there, I'm going to take my paper and press into it. We want to press firmly, just like we do with our other prints. We don't want to press it too hard and ruin our plate, but we want to just firmly press because we want to make sure that every part of that plate that has pigment on it is touching our paper. So just take your time with that. And once you've got it pressed, you can pick it up and you'll see your print. So our tester print, I mentioned that there are a couple pieces of information that we can pull from that first print. The first one is I can see I need a little more pigment on my plate, right? Because I have a couple areas where there is not as much. So I'll remember that for the next time I pull my print. The second thing I can pick up is that all my lines are deep enough. I can see each of those lines in. So I don't have to go back through and deepen any of those lines. But I do notice, one of the things I do notice is I want to add more lines to my leaves. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to set my print aside. And with the end of my paintbrush here, I'm going to add some more leaves, lines to my leaves. So I'm just going to take that brush and do a couple lines on each of those leaves. Again, whatever lines you're doing, you want to make sure that they're going pretty deeply. You don't want to go all the way through, but you want to make sure they are deep enough. So I'm just kind of pressing that in. All right. Now I'm ready to pull my next print. So I'm going to add a little more pigment. And I'm going to roll my brayer across it. Again, I want to cover a nice thin layer across my brayer. So I'm going to take my time with it. Make sure I have a nice cover. And then roll it across my plate. Again, we want that one smooth roll. If you realize you don't have enough pigment on your plate after the first roll, definitely roll it again. But you want to make sure you're doing that one smooth roll. All right. So once I have that, I can take my paper and press it into my plate. Again, pressing firmly because I want to make sure that every part of that pigment is touching my paper. And then I can peel it up. Yeah. And I have a nicer print here. So I can see that I got a good amount of pigment on my plate and those extra lines added to my print. So that's something nice about that. Um, and you can see again that whatever I'm doing, whatever print I'm pulling, is going to be the mirror image of what my plate is. And so there's a good thing to kind of keep in our mind as we do our printing. Again, I want to talk just a little bit. I know I mention it in every video, but I want to talk just a little bit about cleaning our plate. So you can see with mine here, I'm getting some pigment in those lines that I've created. So one of the things that I can do is pull out my piece of scrap paper here, and I can take my plate and press it into that paper. This is one way to kind of get that extra paint off because that buildup of paint, the more we build it up, the more it'll transfer to our prints, to our paper. And so it's good to kind of get that out of each of the, oh my gosh, get it out of each of those divots, right? And so it's ready to print. There are a couple ways to clean our plate. You can do that with like a wet paper towel or a wipe, but you can also, because it's styrofoam, you can go to the sink and just wash it off with water. Because we're using acrylic paint, it comes off pretty easily with just a little soap and water. Nothing fancy, just regular dish soap or hand soap will work well for this. Now, when it comes to our brayer, we can clean that the same way, rolling it across the paper to get that extra pigment off. So we have most of that pigment off our brayer. Then we can go to the sink and wash it with just a little soap and water. So it's easier to clean up. Well, I hope this process has been enjoyable. It is one of my favorites. So thank you so much for letting me share that with you. Happy printing, everyone. And hopefully we'll see you soon.